Hey, what's up guys, Chris here, back with another Borderlands 3 flag build, and today we're going to go over a different kind of build, something that I haven't seen too many people covering, and this is not going to be the infamous crit build. I wanted to go with something a little bit more different. I find the crit build rather boring at times, especially since everybody seems to play it. So today I'm going to present you an infinite rack spam build. It's actually extremely fun, even though it's not as powerful as the infamous crit build. It doesn't actually have to be if it is still good at clearing trash mobs or even at going against bosses. So yes, let's just jump right in with everything that you need to know about this build, how I reached it and how you can use it in order to have a little bit more fun with this class and experiencing it in a different light. So I'm going to start things off with the actual setup before going into the skills themselves, because there's a few important things here that I'm going to talk about, and a few items that are going to greatly influence the quality of this build. So it goes without saying that if you want to use an infinite red attack build, you're going to want to have as many rack attack abilities as well as a very low cooldown on that. So you will want to prioritize items that come in anointed, as well as with these bonuses over here, such as for example extra charges of red attack, which is what I have on this hostile crossroad. This is probably the best in slot for my current build, and everything else that gives you similar attacks or skill cooldown reduction. For example, I have a few over here that greatly reduce my skill action. In total with this build you will have 4 rack attacks and about 1 or 2 seconds cooldown, and you can even reduce that even more with some of your passives. On top of that, I also have this Brawler's Ward. You don't actually need to have this one, and the reason I'm using this is because on action skill and action skill cooldown rate is increased by 20% for a short time, and guess what? You're using rack attacks constantly, and every time you're using it you gain another 20% cooldown reduction because of it. But you can also go with something a little bit more different, such as for example this health rerouter over here, also anointed, that actually grants me an extra charge of rack attack on itself. So I've actually tested these around, and I actually found that not having the extra charge of rack attack and instead having the action skill cooldown reduction is better, because it just means I can spam them more. But you don't actually need these 2 shields over here. You can go with something different. As long as the anointed bonus gives you the action skill reduction, it's all you need. On top of this, I also have a really useful class mod, and in this case I want to go over the Bounty Hunter. The Bounty Hunter over here is quite essential, I might say, not only because it comes with probably the best stats over here for my current build, in this case 31% action skill cooldown rate. This is on top of the 20% that I already have. It also comes with an SMG damage of 31%, grenade damage 30%, so this synergizes extremely well with the Crossroads SMG. But most important of all, Flag has a 3% chance to activate any purchased hunt kill skill when dealing gun damage. I'm going to go over the skill tree in just a little bit, but what this means is that if you go into your skill tree and if you have any hunter kill skill activated and invested points into, that item over there has a chance to activate it. In this case, it mostly benefits either the interplanetary stalker, but it also works with something like the most dangerous game. When killing badass or stronger enemies, it just gives me this gun damage 33%, critical hit damage 13.3%. On top of that, bosses are now also considered humans, beasts or robotics for Flag's hunt skills, which means that on average you're going to deal more damage against them, and even more so it's going to synergize with the Hunter's Eye, which gives you exactly those bonuses. The next one that I have is the Static Charge, and the reason I got this one is simply for the 21% action skill cooldown rate. So if you look at this, I have 21% from the artifact, 31% from the class mod, 20% from this one over here, and this is before applying any skills, many of which reduce the cooldown even more when attacking enemy, when scoring critical hits or when killing enemies. So all in all, a lot of synergizing over here that lets you spam all of these abilities very well. Now let's go over the actual skill tree, because there's a bunch of options over here that you can go with. I'm going to present you my variant, but this is not the definitive version of it. You can go with something slightly different. You can either focus more on the hunter tree or on the stalker tree, but in this case I went with the furious attacks. It's a no-brainer. no-brainer. You gain furious attacks, which gives you gun damage and handling whenever you're shooting an enemy. I also went in with the overclocked. It flat out increases your fire rate by 10% and an additional 10% after reloading. I then invested some points into Eager to Impress, and since this build is mostly aimed towards groups of enemies, this is very important. This basically reduces the action skill cooldown time whenever you kill an enemy or when your pet kills an enemy. But guess what? Your cooldown is already only 2 seconds because of those items that you already have, so realistically speaking, you're never going to have to wait for your rack attacks in order to use them, simply because you have this and all of those abilities. From here on, I went with Turn, Tail and Run, as well as with the Lick the Wounds. This one is pretty self-explanatory. When you move, you gain health regeneration. When you're static, you gain gun damage, and yes, gun damage is still going to be important for this build. I also went with Lick the Wounds. I mean, who doesn't want for their pet to come in and just resurrect them? This is extremely useful, and in prolonged fights, this has helped me quite a bit. Then I also invested self-repairing system, just so I can have a little bit more health regeneration. It definitely helps with this build, and the reason for that is because you no longer have the fade away ability to hide in the shadows and avoid the damage, so you need better health regeneration and better survivability. So yeah, this is why I invested 3 points here, 3 more points into the Fast and the Furious. While above have health, flak, gun damage and movement speed is increased, and as I've said, the gun damage is still important. And finally, I went with the Power Inside. This is the plan all along, to get that 25% damage or 50% damage if you're full health. But again, if you don't want to go this deep into the Stalker tree, you can definitely go into the Hunter's tree. And I'm going to start with the staples. I'm going to start with Leave No Trace, Head Count. I also went in with Interplanetary Stalker, 5 points over here. The reason for that is, as I was saying, I have the Bounty Hunter class mode over here that gives me 3% chance whenever I'm shooting the bullets to activate exactly that skill, so I don't have to kill enemies in order to get this. From this point on, I went in with the Head Count. This is a no-brainer. Action skill cooldown is reduced on critical hits. You're doing a ton of critical hits, both with the rack attacks as well as with your weapons, so yes, a no-brainer. The next one is Two Fang, and depending if you're going with a hybrid or not between rack attack and gun damage, you might want this or not. And if you're not planning to use your weapon that much and instead rely on rack attacks, then you can simply bypass this and just go in with Hunter's Eye instead to get more critical hit damage against humans, armor damage against robots, and damage reduction against beasts. And again, because you have the class mod over here that makes bosses to be considered humans, beasts, or robotics, it synergizes with this as well. On the other hand, you can also invest more into Big Game. I definitely recommend you going with Big Game and even avoiding Two Fang, for example, because this increases the effectiveness as well as the duration of your hunter skills, and this applies very well to the most dangerous game, but even more so to the Interplanetary Stalker. The Interplanetary Stalker buff doesn't last too long, it's just a few seconds, but if you have the Big Game, it basically doubles the amount that it lasts. Finally, if you want to go full in and go even deeper into the Hunter tree, I definitely recommend going into Grim Harvest. This gives you like 25% action skill damage on its own, but you would have to sacrifice this one over here, the Power Inside, which alone gives you 25% and 50% when you're full health. But if you don't constantly find yourself at full health, you might not benefit from this as much as you might think, case in which you might want to go with this and go a little bit deeper into the Hunter tree. So again, a matter of preference. This is currently what I went with, and it is still performing really well. Now, in terms of the abilities, of course, we're going to use the Rack Attack, the Rack Accelerate. It gives you another charge of 1 and another cooldown rate of 20%. I would even go as far as saying that Rack Accelerate is mandatory for this build to work. The additional cooldown rate and the skill charge are just too good not to have. Otherwise, I went with the Flock and Load, and this gives me additional 2 racks for each attack, so essentially you're just throwing in more birds at the enemy and it increases its damage overall. Finally, from this point on, it's a matter of preference. If you want to have a better health regeneration, you can go with Falconeer's Fist. As far as Rack Open a Cold One, this applies cryo damage to your racks in case your enemies resist to incendiary damage, so you can switch between these two depending on the resistances of your enemies, and this is generally how you will have your setup, I'm using mostly the Crossroad SMG, mainly because it's the most OP SMG, mainly because it's the most powerful SMG in the game. It greatly benefits from this build. If my rack attacks are not good enough to take down the enemy, this is more than enough to do that. It also comes with a very good anointed bonus over here, and to top it all off, I also have that 31% SMG damage bonus increase. So how do you go about this build? Well, it's pretty simple. If you use this one over here, you're going to have a full-on 4. If you go in and use this build, you're going to have a total of 4 RAKKS at your disposal, but the cooldown rate on it is only 2 seconds, so you can essentially just stay in one place, spam these, and you will never drop below 1 or 2 RAKKS. As you can see right now, I constantly have at least 2 RAKKS remaining every time I'm using these, because I have all of those bonuses to cooldown reduction. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and the build. If you run any other different variants of it, let me know down below, and in the meantime, a thumbs up on this video would be super appreciated. Also subscribe and activate the notification bell, and I'm going to see you guys in the next one.